Hey, Daryl, you just missed somebody.
Struggle from the same group.
Okay, are we on the record again? Do we have anyone on the phone? Mr. Francis on the phone, thank you. So I just note for the record that Mr. Dunbar had to head off to a memorial, and Ms. Zalatel is also heading to another commitment. And that means, that means that the question quotient will be reduced by at least, what's 2/6, 1/3? I don't know.
Oh, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least.
You're assuming equal questions.
Yes. So with that, we'll now return to the budget conversation, the 250 slot community development.
Yes, and again, in the interest of time, I think I'll just kind of narrowly go through these because I think a lot of these are just going to be the repeat of what we have been talking about. So the reversal of one-time items, we're seeing here the salary and benefit continuation adjustments, specifically just for the community development department. Non-labor cost increases. I believe this is related to GIS and our, I think it's called Esri software requirements, and then the fleet adjustment inside of the community development department, and no proposed changes for community development. Ooh, that question quotient just went way down. And then there's one capital project that's listed under community development, and that's our 1% for art contribution. This is an annual contribution that happens for the preservation of the municipal art collection.
That'd be like light bulbs at the Tenina Center, Mr. Peterson.
So we're not adding additional art. We're just trying to upkeep what we already have.
Correct.
Okay,
yes.
great. Thank you.
I don't think that's exactly true. So if you go back to the construction budget, the PM&E and the actual, once we're building, the art is actually paid for through that process. This is the conservation portion of it. So, I mean, if we have construction, we have 1%.
Although it's just recent that we added this ability to maintain. I think Bill Falsey worked on it. I remember when that happened a couple years ago. So we must have, before the fund must have allowed for the purchase of art, and then now it's allowed for also the maintenance. Anyway, I don't know that it matters, but
Right.
Because there was a switch. So what was it before? You know what I mean?
When we allowed a different kind of art, you could do
Yeah.
temporary exhibitions and things of that nature. The change, it's an interesting change, but just, it wouldn't be a true statement to say we aren't funding art.
Right.
It's this line doesn't fund art.
Fair enough.
Okay, moving on to building services. What you'll notice is that we have the continuation of the salary and benefits adjustments, but you'll notice is that this now includes the transfer of the position from building services to the municipal attorney's office for civil attorney. And I think Ms. Dombowski touched on it a little earlier, and I think the people that attended the Public Safety Committee meeting and Sarah, our prosecutor, kind of touched on the fact that we have an issue with the pay disparity and retaining attorneys and things like that. And so this is just going in line with that and trying to retain those attorneys and creating positions that we can keep our Department of Law operational.
Please.
So that's what?
You don't have one.
It's you and me now, Chris, causing trouble. So is that just operating money that you're just saying, oh, you can use instead of our department using it? Or is that actual? Okay.
Yep, it's just a transfer. So this is kind of what you've seen in traffic and planning, just the movement. So
Yeah.
it's not creating additional PCNs, it's just the movement from one department to the other.
And is that to generally increase pay for the attorneys?
It'll be used to not only increase pay, but also create a civil attorney position.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Got it.
But the add-on question
Was
to
that
that,
sigh for me, Jamie?
the add-on question is what are we, yeah.
I can relate.
It's okay. So we're removing a position from building services. So what position are we removing?
This would be the building services director position.
Formerly Ron Thompson.
Okay, so effectively it's a reorganization. We're changing. We have Lance. Yeah, he's been gone for a while. Yeah, we have Lance at the top, and then we have the 3 sub-department heads, and then, or maybe 5 now, whatever it is. Okay. Well, go ahead. So I just want to understand what we're removing, and I'm probably okay with it, but I just need to understand.
Through the chair, Mr. Constant. Yes, the previous organization, we had a building services director, which the development services director, the building official, and the planning director reported to, and then reported to Adam at that point, or the community development director. That middle layer position is not going to be funded. So the planning director and the development services director will report to me as the community development director.
And you're not funding it. Are you eliminating it, the PCN, or is it just kind of going on the shelf?
I think it's probably just going on the shelf. Without any money, we won't be able to fill it.
Roger. Thank you. That's a strategy.
All right, with that, we will move on to development services. Again, you'll notice a continuation, labor changes, the fleet adjustment. Sorry, I started too quickly. Under the continuation, we are doing the same type of movement that you've seen in traffic. In the planning department, we are transferring 2 engineering tech positions out of this department, but we're going to move them to project funding. So it's not a reduction of PCNs in total. They're just going to a new funding source. And then you'll notice that under the proposed budget, we are requesting to adjust the structural inspector to structural inspector foreman for $24,000.
So, Lance, who are your directors? You have from the previous one. I guess community development is you. Building services is who?
Building services is a vacant position right now.
And then development services.
Development services, Greg Soule is the acting right now. Typically, the development services director is also the building official. So that's a vacant position. That director position is vacant. And so we're actively looking to fill that one.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask something?
Ms. Quinn Davidson.
So whatever happened to the inspector positions that the admin wanted to let go and then reinstated the funding, but I think they were let go, right? I mean, there are fewer inspectors.
Yes, through the chair, Miss Quinn Davidson, they're back. There was
They're
some,
back,
yeah,
okay.
we had some movement. They moved to different departments, and then through some conversations with their bargaining unit, we were able to bring them back. And so I think we're back on back to where we were earlier.
Okay, so that's sort of status quo, like 2021 and before, basically.
Correct.
Oh, okay, thanks.
So is this the time in the presentation to discuss the increase of potential funding for abatement or, code abatement and cleanups and other services? We had a building that we had to emergency appropriate out of, I forget exactly which pool, it might have been fund balance, to take down on fireweed. And we find ourselves in a position where we are responsible for dangerous, dilapidated, deteriorating, or unhealthy buildings. And traditionally, we find ourselves in a position always of, we don't have any money, what are we going to do? And so where is that in this process? Have we thought that through somewhat to get ahead of that curve?
I'll let Greg go ahead and start, and then I'll talk a little bit about state funding as well. But go ahead, Greg.
Mr. Chair, so basically there's a fund that was created and it's entirely funded through fees and fines that are generated through the code abatement process. And right now, that's the pot of money that we use to board up buildings, secure them with perimeter fencing, demo when needed. But that's essentially the only pot of money that we have for that. Right now, the building that was demoed on fire, we used money from elsewhere. We brought it in from the vacant director position and also from the 205, or the code abatement fund that I was talking about.
And then the assembly appropriated, I believe, $500,000 to assist in ongoing or more in-depth work. And so the question, I guess, and maybe we haven't contemplated it, is how do we get a little bit stronger in that place? Because like with the police and their towing money, we ran out. And that leaves us with cars. I mean, there was a car on the highway for 3 weeks at the Eagle River Chugiak on-ramp because there was no money to tow them. It was on a highway, and that's not your problem. You're talking your buildings. But the same problem happens. Like I had conversations with some of the staff of the departments where they needed $50,000 to do mold testing to ensure that these properties were safe for people to live in, and we didn't have money. And so I want to figure out, how do we get ahead of that? If that fund is the only source, can we come up with some other funding source? Should we?
And yes, Mr. Chair, we did hear about the $500,000 that hasn't become available to us yet for code abatement, but we're waiting for that to happen. And then we are bringing on an additional code abatement position, which is being transferred from structural, essentially. Right now, we do have some 300 plus cases for code abatement that the three current code abatement officers monitor and whatnot. In terms of mold testing and that sort of thing, we are doing that on 2 properties that I'm sure the ones you're aware of, and all we can do there, because it's still privately owned, so we can issue. We basically post them as unsafe buildings and notices to vacate, and at that point we start fining the owner, to have him, to compel him to come into compliance with the health and safety codes and whatnot, so that the building is habitable. But we can't get into demolition until they're in arrears on their property taxes, and we can assume ownership through foreclosure.
And they pay $5 1 year, they're off the list. And so the game goes on. And so
Yeah.
the question is, how do we get ahead of that? Anyhow, that's maybe not a budget question, but I am interested in ensuring that fund is sufficient enough to do the work when the public needs it. Mr. Cross.
In those cases on properties, do we pursue insurance? I mean, because the property owner is required, and if it's fire damage, you may not have fire insurance, but if it becomes an environmental hazard, then the federal government, the DEC, has very liberal rules on getting compensated for environmental hazards. So I'm wondering if we look at pursuing anybody that had any kind of mortgage is required to have insurance, and all insurance policies are required to have an environmental addendum, in which case just file against it and get compensated at least somewhat. The federal government, the DEC, and the EPA make it very, very very easy to get compensated for environmental issues. They take it very seriously. So even if we can't get full compensation, know that if there's ever property insurance on it, more than likely there's a compensation there somewhere. But thank you.
Through the chair, Mr. Cross, I haven't heard of pursuing anything through the insurance, but that's a good question. I'll follow up on that.
I think so, but it's hard to tell.
Ask, is code enforcement in development services, or where is it?
Code enforcement is, we sort of refer to the right-of-way department as code enforcement. And through right-of-way department, we have land use enforcement. Their job is essentially to assure that all the land uses are in conformance with the zoning. So there's land use enforcement, there's code enforcement, which is everything in the right-of-way, and then we have our code abatement, which is through our building safety division.
The answer to your question is it's all in development services.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, so I guess I'll let us move on, but I want to say that I think that there's a project that we should get with the attorneys, with the development services people, and some folks who live in neighborhoods that are really challenged with scary properties, and figure out some pathways forward, because what we're doing now is minimal. You know, like when Mr. Trombley had to scramble to figure out how to take down a building that's loaded with poison and dangerous, people are burning it down on themselves. It signals that we're not doing something at the right level. It's not systematic. So anyhow, thank you, everybody. Oh, Miss Allard.
Just to kind of hit on what Chris was saying, I did receive quite a few complaints in regards to what you said, slumlord. Did you say that? Okay. So I just want to make sure. And it was appalling, the pictures and everything I saw. And the individual trying to make the complaints to the municipality basically got stonewalled. So I don't know if there is going to be an easier avenue, but these individuals are already struggling to pay their rent. But then if they're living in a place where they literally can't, the water's not working properly, they can't flush the toilet, the heat's not working, we got a problem. So I'm just reiterating, that's all. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, the risk there is like someone's charging $1,400 a month rent and they can get it because these families are strapped and they need a place to be. And then we take it from them in some method, then they're homeless, right? Then that's terrible because we know where that is at. And they have property rights. And if we do something assertively, you know, like you would think to do is help the landlord fix it, then we're actually helping a slumlord be more of a slumlord. It's such a complex problem. So sometime in the next year, let's have a real in-depth conference on that.
Okay, and thank you. We will move on to planning, and we'll have Craig Lyon come up. So again, the reversal of one-time items out of the department from the 2022 revised budget, continuation level salary adjustments, and the realignment of the fleet costs. And again, this is where you see the movement of the position from planning to traffic engineering. So this is just that offset to what we've seen earlier. And there are no proposed budget changes for the planning department. All right.
Before I move on, Craig,
Oh, just in the next.
I would just tell you, you probably need a new position because my peer in North Anchorage is determined to look closely at all of our entitlements and make it easier for people to do things like build more housing. So you might need a new staff just to manage him.
Right. I'm trying to throw a lot of things your way. However, I can support the planning department. I'm very happy to do so.
So need more staff. Yeah, need more staff, not less staff. So just
Right.
FYI.
Yeah, I think maybe a transportation planner would be interesting. Housing planning. Yeah.
I would disagree. And I say that because it's just more bureaucrats within a system, and I think Craig's doing a great job. Okay, sorry. Come on, you know I had to disagree with something. Okay.
No, and I understand that, and I know he's very competent. I just know that if the time I'm spent hearing from Daniel on issues related to your department, I know eventually it's going to land in your lap, and not a bad thing, just a lot of things. So, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so Mr. Welton had an amendment in here to do a short-term rental study in Girdwood. Was that completed or is that on in planning to be completed or?
Yes. Okay. Through the chair, Mr. Peterson, that's noted at the top here. This is funds that came, I think, in April timeframe. And we worked to try and get that moving. It was such a small chunk of money that we were challenged to be able to figure out how to actually make that work. So since it was just for this year, we were unable to get it moving this year. So that did not occur.
Okay, well, maybe the members from South Anchorage are interested in that happening in the future. We'll have to
First,
see.
Ms. Allard, and then Ms. LaFrance in the queue.
It's more of a comment. So some of the feedback that I've gotten from some of the community members is that they're told one thing and then they come back and they speak to somebody else and it's another thing. Or that same person will come back a week later and say, no, I misspoke. So I don't know if that's something that your department is working on with as far as communication. I know it's kind of not a budget question, but I mean, you're here.
Yeah, through the chair, Ms. Allard. I mean, it's a normal course of business, I guess, inside a department. We have about 30 employees, and I try to emphasize that if you're going to, make a pronouncement or make a decision on something, please let me know so that we can be on the same page. I mean, as you know, I was AMAT's coordinator for many years, but not working on the land use planning side. So it's all an education for me, but that allows me to make sure that I'm trying to be involved in every decision. So, but sometimes I'll phrase it as inadvertent responses occur before maybe we look down too deeply into it. So, we're humans. We do make mistakes, and a couple of those in the past year were that. But we're trying to make sure that we're getting on the same page and that we get the experts in the room to make a decision. So we only have to do it once.
Thanks. I appreciate your response. Thanks, Chris.
That's often short-term planning and outside of your department. It's inspectors, fire, and building. So, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had put myself in the queue to ask the same question that Mr. Peterson had asked, a short study. And I would be interested in the follow-up information. How much money would be needed to do it? I assume that $12,000 just went into fund balance. But Mr. Lewis, if you could provide some maybe follow-up information in an email to me, I would be interested in talking about carrying a similar amendment, maybe with more funding forward. Thanks.
So if I could interpret, you came across a little bit spotty there, Ms. LaFrance. What I think it was it sounded like because the project didn't happen, it's not going to happen. The money's going back into the general fund this year, and next year it's out of the budget. Is it fair to assume that the project isn't going to happen with the funds that were made available, or is it happening still just in a different timeline with the initial funds? And if it's not, then do we need to reappropriate to get it done? Hold on. Is that a fair assessment, Ms. LaFrance?
It's kind of close. Mostly I wanted to know how much money is needed to do what needs to be done.
Yeah, that was clear. Thank you.
Through the chair, Ms. LaFrance, we can follow up with that dollar figure. I don't, I'm not used to that side of the house as much to know if that's enough. And I'm not OMB savvy enough to know, but I believe that the money went back into some source of funding, not in the planning department anymore. So that money is not there to do a project next year. So their money would have to be added to do that sort of project for next year.
Thank you. Yes, that'd be great if you could let me know.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Yeah, so one of the things we've talked about for years, and we hear a lot from developers and folks who are trying to get more housing in our city, is that, sometimes the planning department, there's maybe people who've been around a long time and maybe sort of a culture of, this is what we hear, I don't know, a culture of bureaucracy, or like, I went to the fire and they said, I didn't realize that's not part of planning, but I went to fire, they said this, and I went there, they said something else. Then I went there, they said something else. Then this guy wanted me to submit this long blah, blah, blah. Anyway, and what people have suggested as an answer is to have people who are not interested in bureaucracy and interested in solving problems and sort of have broad knowledge of the different pieces to getting something built, that could be like project liaison sort of things, where that person says, oh, this is a big important project for the community. I'm going to work with you with fire, or I'm going to work with you on all these other elements so that you don't find yourself just being bounced around. And I think that's something we've talked about back when we were like into Bend and Adams and stuff. I think that was in there. And which for the new members was like a report that I think the Rasmussen Foundation funded on how can we make our departments more efficient and more development friendly, et cetera. And so I'm just wondering, with the room we have in the tax cap this year, is that something that the department would like? I mean, if we were able to fund a few positions whose job was exclusively to collaborate with different folks and just basically get shit done and like solve problems, would that be helpful? And what's the current status? I don't think those exist now, but if they do, please correct me.
Through the chair, Ms. Quinn Davidson, I am looking actually at doing that. I am familiar with the report as I'm taking on this new role. There's always two sides to every story. Sometimes people come in, they're frustrated, but they're answer shopping. So they go to one place and they don't like the answer that they get, and they go to another department until they get the answer they like, and then they say, oh, well, so-and-so did it, rather than, having one cohesive approach. A lot of people come to planning or development services, their homework's not complete, and then they claim that we're delaying their activity, and we just ask them to complete their homework, and we'll make sure that their dreams come true. One of the things that I want to do is find out, because the idea of actually having someone help a developer with a really large, complicated project, whether it's commercial or residential, be aware of all of the stops they're likely going to get and the key things they need to know, whether it's in traffic or in inspection or in zoning, and have somebody to help them do that on really big projects or really complicated projects, rather than having somebody come in and just do their job for them, rather than having someone help them along. Because I think there's a benefit to doing that. I'm familiar with that report. I'm actually re-familiarizing myself, because when they were created, I wasn't in a position to try to figure out how to actually make those things work. So as soon as I get through with them, I'll be visiting with Amy and probably Adam and definitely my team to find out what some things could be done. Through my experience, I can see that some of those comments generally come from one or two individuals. Similarly, the concerns or constraints from the other side generally come from one or two individuals. So to paint the industry one way or to paint the entire building inside the permit center that way is really unjust. And so I'm working to do that. I think Adam was working to do that as well. Hopefully I can pick it up where he left off. I've met with the home builders. I know where they're coming from.
Can I just respond briefly? That sounds great, Lance. And I guess an offer that, to the extent you think that you will have some sort of positions and you want them to be in 23, obviously we could address it in first quarter budget revisions. We don't have to do it right now, but we could, if you have a vision of maybe what you do. If you're not ready, that's okay. And yeah, and I don't mean to paint, I surely don't have any idea what's going on over there. So to me, it's all just hearing it from different sides and different people. And I know we have a lot of great staff, and that, so I didn't mean to malign anyone, but I do think that a lot of what I hear is not necessarily the answer shopping. Maybe that's because I hear from the people who are doing it. But what I hear is, oh, we completed this thing and it was a bunch of work and that was great, but no one here mentioned that we'd have to do that thing. And then once we went over there, they had us do a little change that now triggered that we have to go back here. Whereas if these two sort of, administrative entities were talking, they would have solved they would have found out what to do from the beginning and avoided all of that. So that's usually what I hear. I don't know about other members, but.
And I'll add a wrinkle to that. What I heard you say, Lance, was for larger projects. And my experience is that the larger projects tend to hire someone who is professionally in the business of doing what was just suggested. And that it's actually somewhere in the middle. And in particular, like oftentimes grandma's trying to do a bathroom, don't know what they're doing. And then all of a sudden they're $100,000 in a hole because they didn't know what to do. And so I think somewhere between the bigs and the smalls is a solution that could really help.
Yeah, yes, I think we're on the same page. It's not a one size fits all. There are folks who have never done anything like this before. We want to make sure that it's a simple, smooth process for them and it's not frustrating. And to Ms. Quinn Davidson's comment, one of the things I know that the planning department does it and others are involved. It's not necessarily doesn't have to be large, but it might be complex, where you have a pre-application meeting and you get all of the particular parties in the room and go, be sure that you're thinking this in mind, keep this in mind. We're not going to do your design, but make sure that you think about all of these things. And then that conversation happens before they spend a lot of money putting design together. So no, I think that, again, I think Adam did a great job bringing the industry and the department, people in that building together, kind of finding some common ground. And I've had an opportunity to meet with those. And obviously, I know a lot of people in that building. So I think we will do good things.
Thank you. We have one more briefing.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kevin. Go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I 100% agree with what Austin said. And as far as there needs to be a czar or somebody who oversees the departments. Oftentimes it's, well, I mean, when you have a dispute, because I have had building safety and fire at a property argue back and forth and have me tear stuff apart and put it back together and tear it apart and put it back together until they finally agreed, you know what, put it back to the way you found it. Okay. Costs thousands of dollars in months. And ultimately the complaint says, well, they just need to be trained more because the code is complicated. That was the answer. Okay. So yes, the code is complicated. Yes, you could say it's training, but ultimately sometimes you do run into problems where the departments go back and forth. And I will tell you, the contractors are afraid to say anything because they feel as if the environment is vindictive. Just telling you what they tell me. They're afraid to bring up complaints because you complain about an individual. Next thing you know, your other projects are going to be difficult. So they're afraid to give public testimony because they're telling me this is not your normal home builder. These are people who do large commercial contracts and do something and say, if I complain about how long it's taken, if I do something, Kevin, I'm just open myself up to target. You just suck it up. So ultimately, how do we deal with that? I understand that everybody wants to be right and look good. However, there's some issues that are very concerning. And so, and I appreciate your attentiveness to this. But I think a lot of it is that the code can be very complex. And then if you can't agree, who is the ultimate authority and where do you go with that? Because everybody wants to look good and be right. So thank you.
Can I say one thing before we move on? I just want to speak to my experience as a new member working with the planning department that has been very positive. And I'd like Craig to leave just knowing that the hard work of the planning department is not discounted. When folks say, these are just bureaucrats, I think that the contributions of the planning department are very valuable. Thank you.
Thank you. It's just scary when you're going to do a project.
And can I add, it's not actually always planning. A lot of times it's development services or, it's just sort of a larger conversation about how do we be customer friendly and how do we channel really good staff into solving problems. So.
All right, and with that, we will move on to our last slide. Well, last department slide, and that is real estate. And so I think we'll just go to the proposed section, which is, as it was highlighted, Mr. Wilbur has a lot of hats that he is wearing right now. And so what we are proposing is to create or fund the real estate director position. It would oversee real estate department, including the HLB fund. So they would be 50% funded inside of the real estate department and the HLB fund. So that half funding on each side. If there are any questions.
Can I ask? We can't end on time. That would be crazy.
You have
So
1 minute.
Okay, so remind me, there was a real estate director. This was like kind of a weird switcheroo deal, right? So then you guys removed the real estate director, or no, we didn't approve him, and then you put him somewhere else, and then Adam was acting. Okay, I'm trying to remember. So did that position go away and now you're adding it back? Is that basically the essence of?
It didn't go away, so I think it's kind of the same situation as the building
Or
services
unfilled.
direct. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't
So-
mean the PCN. I just mean.
Yep, it was
there
just
no one there.
unfunded, and
Okay.
so what we're requesting is,
Got it.
proposing is to fund that position now.
Okay,
Yeah.
that sounds great. And then how is 189,000 only half?
So you're seeing the full cost of it here, but
Oh, okay.
yeah, because it doesn't show we verbally, like in the writing, showed that it was 50% funded on each side, and that's what it reflects when you see the funding sources. But on here, you're seeing the full cost of the position.
Okay, thanks.
Was it unfunded or unfilled?
It was unfunded.
If
Well, yeah, both.
If I could help, you might recall this. during the budget debates, Mr. Trombley had indicated that he had asked you guys not to fund that position, instead to fill the building services director position for Ron Thompson. And under the leadership of Mr. Wilbur for that department, the need is different. And so he would rather have the real estate director position filled. And then he doesn't need the building services director, or that's not something that he would like. He wants to reorganize it a little bit.
And that makes sense because it's based on Lance's experience. You know, everyone brings something different, and
And we need a real
Great.
estate director.
yeah.
It's a
Okay, looks good to me.
municipality is a real estate company.
All right, and so that is the end of today's work session. We do have another work session next Friday. I believe we did adjust, I don't know, based on what we did today, I'm not sure we should have, but we did adjust the timeline from 11 to 3 next Friday. But we will finish up with the general government departments, and then we will go into the utility and enterprise departments, and then the next work session after that, as far as the budget schedule, is the Assembly's work session. I believe it was moved to November 10th. And then with the possible Assembly action on the November 22nd meeting. So
Can I ask a question to Desiree? When, maybe we should talk about this offline, but do you know when you're going to expect to want Assembly budget amendments? Since now the deadline or the session will be the 10th. I guess it's usually a few days before that. So you have time to collate them.
I try to ask for, I believe, typically the Monday or Tuesday before the meeting, but you know,
Yeah.
I know how you guys work.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Yeah.
You
But I will
got-
be sending out an email to you all with templates and all of that, following up with
Okay,
information. on
and then we
amendments.
should talk about whether you and Forrest and I are going to actually work on a bunch of stuff before the 10th or see what happens. We probably should work on it before the 10th so that other people can see what we're doing. Okay, thanks.
all right, and with that is the budgets are available online at the OMB homepage, and this is the address, and that is what we have for you today.
And only 3 minutes over time.
Yeah, I want to thank Courtney for helping lead such a productive conversation and getting us through this and the information. Thank you.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Same, and Amy too.
Yes, and Ms.
Well, and Marilyn, I'm sure you're doing stuff over there. You're just doing it quietly. But have